Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Angela Love Zarenka, and I am with Lactation Education Resources. And I have the great privilege and honor to introduce Nikisha Killings, Nikki Hunter Greenaway, and they will introduce their special guest. Nikki and Nikki, take it away.
Hey, y'all.
Hello. Hey, everyone.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Listen, this is people are excited today. People are
Yes,
excited.
this
We've
is a
been getting
treat.
messages. I've seen screenshots like I've cleared my calendar. I'm there. So we're so happy that you're joining us today. Real quick, I am Nikisha Killings. I am Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Lactation Education Resources. Shout out to LER for making this possible. I am a private practice lactation consultant in Florida, as well as an equity strategist. I'm joined by my co-founder in Nikki and Nikki Lactation Career Consultants, Nikki Hunter Greenway.
Hello, everyone. I am Nikki Hunter Greenaway. I'm also known as Nurse Nikki, probably better known as Nurse Nikki. No one knows my last name. I am a family nurse practitioner and an IBCLC in private practice in New Orleans, Louisiana, down here in the boot. And I'm excited to see y'all today. There's so many of y'all today, and we thank you for Kimberly for spending your time with us and carving out some time to come and hang.
Of course,
Yes.
I'm excited to be here with my two of my favorite Nickies.
I love it. Tell the people who you are. I'm sure you need no introduction at all, but anything you want to share with our audience about who you are today, Ms. Sills Allers.
Oh, well, my name is Kimberly Seals Allers. I am most importantly a mother, but I also do a lot of maternal health advocacy, particularly around breastfeeding and birth and disparities in those areas. I write, I speak, and I conduct presentations on these issues. And I'm also the founder of the Earth app, which is Earth, IRTH, which is like the word birth, but we dropped the B for bias, which is a new digital platform to address a root cause of the Black maternal mortality and morbidity crisis, which is bias and racism in care. So I'm excited to be here talking about breastfeeding today.
Yes, I think we're going to get into so many things that Earth is here to solve, and so we're excited about that. And those of you who are new to our program and who haven't attended one before, just so you know, we always start with a check-in because there's a lot going on in the world right now. So we just check in to see how each of us is doing, and we want to know how you are doing. So please participate in the chat. Angela will let us know what she's seeing out there while we're focusing on talking to you here. Let's see. I don't think I'm ready to start. Nikki, how are you? Check in, please.
Let
Whew.
me tell y'all something. There's another hurricane coming. This is the craziest 2020 ever. Like I said earlier, I'm down here in New Orleans, and it's a little tense down here just because we have a hurricane that is approaching, and it should hit Friday morning. And all the other hurricanes, Laura went this way, Sally went this way, and Delta is coming straight up. So we are concerned and exhausted, to say the least, because it does pause. It pause and then fast forwards all the way for our practices and our work that we do here because we have to pivot. So that is that. In the midst of virtual teaching, I should have said one of my credentials is I'm a virtual teacher for these children. And that has been something to try and integrate when you're trying to, do private practice and be available for family. So we're chugging along, as I tell folks. We're chugging along. How
I
you doing?
believe you have reported on a hurricane in the last like 5 or 6.
I know.
A
Every
new
live is
one
like hurricane
every time. Yes. At least there isn't one hitting on Wednesday. They're usually hitting on the day that we're doing
Yes,
this, and we
yeah,
have
they
no
usually
idea
hit
if you'll
in.
be around for the whole thing.
Mhm.
Listen, y'all, listen. Yes, I have 4 children. I have been homeschooling them from the womb. But on today, I almost lost it. But trying to explain the difference between diffusion and osmosis. It went out the window somewhere. I lost my track of thought, and there were almost tears. And I'm not talking about the kids. So that is
This is
explaining.
This is where we
where
are.
I am. This is where we are. In the
Mm-hmm.
last few calls, we've said, hey, you know, we're doing okay. We're getting the hang of this. We're kind of moving through this COVID thing. And we're not even calling this the COVID Q&A anymore because we're kind of, you know, talking about all the things that are important to the audience. And we're doing okay. Listen, have you seen the meme where the person says everything's fine, and everything around them is on fire?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I am today.
Fair enough.
It's on
Fair
fire. The
enough.
world's on fire. So I'm not okay. Send prayers, light a candle, something, send love and light. It is just one of those, it is one of those weeks. And I'd be dishonest if I didn't say it has to do with politics in this country. If I said it didn't have to do with COVID and schooling people and, you know, racial tensions. So much is going on at once that all of a sudden, again, it feels real heavy, real heavy. So that's how I'm doing. I'm being honest, and you'll probably see some of that come out as we talk today. Kimberly, how
As
are you?
we
Thank you for asking. You know, I am actually at this point in my life grateful to be old that I don't have young children, because when it comes to online school, I just have to yell at mine. I don't have to participate. I just need to yell and make sure they're there. So my heart goes out to all the parents for what they are going through. I don't know how you all are doing it, but this is certainly a year that we will never forget.
ever.
Neither will our children, because they're like, get us out of here. We
I
want to
know.
go back to school too. So I just want to say hats off to the two of you. Nikki, I've seen some of those pictures when you've had hurricanes and it's like a boat, inflatable boat that you have that all ready to go. I'm just like,
Yes.
mm. But also to say, I mean, sometimes we think about climate change, obviously the way that it impacts the environment. We saw that New York Times article about the way that it's impacting pregnancy outcomes, but the way that it disrupts work, right? The way that it
Mm-hmm.
disrupts the ways that we provide community support, in the models that we know are working cannot be negated when we think about the impact of climate change and why we're
Yeah.
having, you know, such torrential rains and floods all over the country and more hurricanes. And so, you know, so many elements of that are so relevant to our work. On a personal level, I'm doing okay. I, you know, shared on social that I had a surgery in late July that was very difficult and emotional. So I am still kind of getting past that. Well, I'm more like moving through it. I got to stop using that language.
Mm,
I'm moving through it. Some days are better than others, but to Nikisha's point, I think that the climate that we're in, you know, around the politics and what we're seeing around the racial uprisings and the continued police brutality toward our brothers and sisters, it makes it really hard to find joy. You know, like you really got to dig deep. You know, you have to have a practice. You have to really have something. And so I am and still on that journey, but and it is. You know, something that I'm glad to be moving through, but certainly this environment has made it more difficult because you're just like, okay, then you look at the news and you're like, nope, nope,
Mm-hmm.
mm,
no,
yeah,
Mm-mm.
yeah.
going back under the covers, nope.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Angela, let us know how the audience is doing. And while you're pulling up some of that, I want to note or acknowledge the transparency that you showed, Kimberly, in sharing with the world the surgery that you experienced and how you are moving through. I love that language because with anything that we grieve, we're never really past it, right? We just move through.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And it keeps coming back, and we know those waves, and we think we're fine, and then it hits us again. Yeah, and so moving through it actively and intentionally, I think, is a perfect way to choose to experience any type of loss or
Thank
trauma.
you.
Angela, what are the people saying? How are y'all out there? Am I the only one that has the world on fire?
No, no, no. You are not at all. But you all are both getting a lot, all three of you are getting a lot of love. Loves from the panel, and hoping that y'all sail through these times like queens.
Hmm.
Sending you prayers and love and lighting candles, and remember me too. And someone who's giving Kim a shout out, great article in Queen's Family Magazine.
Yes.
Thinking of you in New Orleans and hope you're staying safe and well. There's someone here, it's her first webinar. If you're okay with me mentioning your name, please let me know that I can mention your name, and I'm happy to do so. Otherwise, I will keep you anonymous. We've got North Carolina here, we've got California here,
Nice.
We've got Florida, Virginia, Baton Rouge, Louisiana,
Yay.
Canada is here, Queens,
Canada.
Massachusetts, Philly, Wisconsin. Oh, they're typing in now. The United Kingdom. Okay.
Oh,
Welcome,
wow. Oh,
welcome.
Everybody wants to
yay.
represent. Everybody wants to represent.
Yeah, what time is
Everybody.
it there in the UK? Thank you for being up
Right.
late.
5 hours, about 6:45 is getting
Okay,
to the.
not bad.
Mm-hmm.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool.
So
Thank y'all
no,
so much.
Detroit, Arkansas, St. Louis, Oklahoma. Oh my
Okay.
goodness. A very racist state.
Well,
Sorry. I
You could
can't
have
help
just said
myself on
Florida.
that
You
one.
could have just said
I,
you're here with me. You didn't have to do that.
I could not have just ignored that one. So that was Angela that will edit that out. So here, a lot of love for you. So thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you
you.
for being here. We appreciate that.
Thank
Listen,
you.
we can jump into it. The topic is decolonize breastfeeding. And Nikki and I chose this topic intentionally because this, next Monday is a day that's being celebrated in the United States, at least. Yeah, I call it Indigenous Peoples Day. Other folks,
Hmm.
some states are still calling it Columbus Day.
Right.
So we thought it fitting and appropriate to talk about colonization and decolonizing the work that we do and what that looks like and what that means. I'll start with a definition here. I did go consult the web dictionary to see what the actual official definition of decolonization is. It is the action or process of withdrawing from a former colony, uh, leaving one independent. Independent. So, what in the world does that mean when we're talking about lactation support or birthing and breastfeeding support? Why would that need to be decolonized? Anybody want to jump in?
I'll start. I would say for me, decolonizing breastfeeding means shifting our practice, our education, our opportunities to reflect a decolonized attitude. So unsuppressing cultural norms, embracing melanated skin, and moving away and not trying to contort it to fit the default of what has been called the default of lactation of and white skin. So and trying to say this is how it looks all the time and not accepting or like I said embracing cultural norms and melanated folks.
I think that's a beautiful definition. Can you tell the people again? I know someone's taking notes, Nikki.
um okay. Decolonizing breastfeeding to me means shifting your practice, your education, your opportunities to reflect the decolonized attitude. So unsuppressing cultural norms, embracing melanated skin as opposed to trying to contort it to fit the norms and abnorms of white skin.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds that. So if you're wondering what this has to do with breastfeeding or lactation support, Nikki's now framed it for us, and it means um, refocusing on the folks who maybe have not been the focus of our work for a long time. Certainly not in educating those of us who do this work. We don't see a lot of focus on melanated skin and the folks who have it, and the entire structures around lactation support are steeped in processes and systems and approaches that are not necessarily really culturally congruent, if you will. They're not necessarily intuitive to folks who come from certain cultural backgrounds. And I'll say that's true for me, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's
Kimberly, jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just historically true. It's not a personal experience. It is actually fact. Like I've done the research. So we see not only just the way it impacts the practice side from everything from people not knowing what certain things look like on Black skin, but also getting down to the foundations of research, right? An
Yeah.
evidence-based model that never included people of color, right? A peer support model, which was rooted in the great work that the La Leche League was doing, but they were doing it mostly in white suburbs and not including women of color and working people, right? And so, but this became the foundation of a lot of a model that was used to build what lactation support could look like. And it completely left out a large group of folks. And so we really want to dig deep into thinking about how we can resist that narrative around whose research is important, what exactly something data, and we have this a lot in our work with Earth, but also thinking through who told us that this was who told us that this was the best or this was the thing, right? That was often historically kind of rooted in studies, hierarchies that were created by white people, mostly white men. When we look at the scientific field, practices that were created by, white women. And if you look back at time, it's so interesting in this research because many times these affluent white women had women of color taking care of their children, right? And then the pediatricians came along, who were mostly white males, to really condemn what these women of color were doing and teach these white women the right way. And so they were really, denying and suppressing these indigenous practices that, that were commonplace and healthy because of who was doing it, it was deemed as wrong. And then someone came along with a better idea.
Right.
I think that's perfect segue. I'm sorry, Nikki, did I jump on you?
Oh, no, go ahead.
No. Kimberly brings up a phenomenal point, and it has to do with the way that we approach this work in general. Look, the history of the professional lactation supporter is rooted in the Lactation League. A lot of people don't know that, but the Lactation League was started in the 50s in this country. A handful of white suburban women meeting, discreetly, because breastfeeding wasn't quite popular at that time. But they built a model that supported them and their neighbors and folks who looked like them, meeting in kitchens, in their homes, in their communities, and putting the word out amongst their own channels, right? And supporting one another in a way that made sense for them. And folks in that organization decided to create a credential in the 80s, right? Built off that original model for those original folks. So nowhere along the way do we see a model that's built around the ancestral practices. Folks have been supporting each other in breastfeeding since folks had breasts. You know what I'm saying? Did we even need to professionalize it? Did we even need to make it a certification? You know what I mean? Or were there support methods and approaches already in the community that could have been, that were working fine, right?
Yeah. And I would just say, Nikisha, that if you look at it, when they try to professionalize lactation support, that's when the real barriers crept up, right? And that's when you start to see the real barriers, the real obstacles that were put in place that favored some and disadvantaged others. And there's definitely a question to be made. And I never forget this. And it was Dr. Sahira Long, and we were at some breastfeeding conference, and she said that it was easier for her to become a doctor than IBCLC, right? Like she felt like that path was clear. She knew exactly what she had to do, but this IBCLC thing was confusing to a physician. And so when we look at what has happened in the attempt to professionalize and certify, which of course has many benefits, we need to understand the net gain and what we lost along the way.
Absolutely. Yes. On a personal note, like I became an IBCLC in 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. And I was so against this credential so much because as a nurse practitioner, I can see breastfeeding. And I've been seeing lactating mothers this whole time, helping folks with breastfeeding, but I wasn't even accepting sometimes in my own community if I did not have this credential. And I'm like, what does it even mean to say that I'm an IBCLC? And mind you, it came down to the point was like, Nikki, if you want to have certain positions at the table, come to the table and doors open. And it's amazing the night and day that I've experienced in getting this credential. But I think sometimes even in our own community, we have fed into this like, oh, I need this credential to do this. I need this credential to do this. Pause. Haven't you been doing this work? Like dig deep and like it's already there. The work that you've been doing, it doesn't change. My practice has not changed becoming an IBCLC, but it has been a difference for sure.
So changing those mindsets is a sort of decolonization, right? We have to change the whole lens through which we view what is, what makes someone capable and worthy and valuable as a supporter in our community. Sorry, Kimberly.
And I think that that's exactly what I hear women saying, like, and I think culturally as Black people and particularly as Black women, we need to be validated, right? We want to be accepted. We want to be respected for what we know we bring to the table, regardless of that. But we understand the world in which we live in, which values, letters, whether that's your degree or certification, et cetera, et cetera. And so I feel that Black women feel that they need that even more so to validate themselves to the field. But yet that track has been historically stacked against it. I'm so grateful for all the things that you all have done to support, Black women on that path, the ways that people are helping people get study groups and do the tests. I'm so grateful for that, because I remember writing those early articles that literally said I was looking for a Black IBCLC, and it was like looking for Bigfoot. So, and it wasn't that long ago. So,
It's
Right.
slightly better. Slightly
slightly
better.
better.
Well,
Yes.
if you come to Louisiana, you may still be looking for Bigfoot in certain parts of Louisiana.
It is still easier to find Bigfoot. But just wanting to say, like, I think Black women feel that need on themselves, and then so to feel the need and then to face barriers in kind of achieving that when they know they are capable is incredibly frustrating and unfair.
Yeah. I ran across something last night that talked about the history of the IBCLC credential, and it said the very first year in 1985 there were no prerequisites to sit the exam. Anybody could sit the exam. After that year, they started to create these prerequisites based on those who failed it. What areas did they not know well enough? Okay, let's create a requirement in that area. So we're talking about creating a bar where there was a deficit in information, a deficit in experiences. Talk about pushing folks further behind, right? So if they didn't know this particular aspect of categories that were tested on the exam, then we now create a bar for them to further. They have to achieve this in that particular area that they already don't know to
Right.
sit the test again, right? And who gets to say what was important enough? Who got to say that? Those folks who had already been driving the credential. So we talk about a credential now that's steeped in whiteness, steeped in colonization, steeped in all these systems that don't necessarily speak to the way everyone learns, the way everyone tests, the way everyone performs. We know folks who have test anxiety. They may be brilliant at what they do,
Yes.
but can't pass the test to say they're light, right?
Yes.
And
That
that is
test was
not,
harder than my NP exam. Like, I
and is
didn't
that
even
a
understand. I'm
statement
like,
against
I
you
can
as a
prescribe
practitioner?
medication and all this stuff, but I can't assess nobody breast over here because this test.
Right.
So it was, yeah, it's a
So
challenge. And that's
what can
so,
we,
I was just saying it's so disheartening that I didn't even know
yeah.
that piece of it, but that is very disheartening.
Yeah, and it's grown and grown. The year that I was going to first sit for the test, there were certain requirements, and they shifted it that year, and that set me back another 3-4 years. I got a master's on the way to sitting the exam based on meeting that new bar and getting those additional classes I had to get. That should not be the case. How is a credential accessible when I had to get a master's to get
Well, that
to the
and
test?
that assumes that they want the credential to be accessible, and that's also up for
Mm,
discussion, because sometimes barriers are created on purpose, right? And there's a lot of gatekeeping in this work, unfortunately, that we are continually to work on and to break down around who is worthy, who is not, who has traditionally led this field, which we know has been, white female dominated, and the ways that we have been pushing and asking and calling for more diversity and inclusion and belonging and all the other things we're using to say, and there's been resistance. And so you have to ask, and whose interest was it to create all these additional barriers? And it was serving somebody, right? So, we really have to think through not just the work that we're doing, but how we're doing it and the systems and structures that shape who has access and entry into this work in a meaningful way.
yes, yes. Oh, we got notes from Angela here. Angela, stop. Okay.
That's not a real question.
Someone is asking if the Lecture League is inclusive.
That is a
Next.
Let me tell
question.
you,
That is a question that someone said. And so someone else is asking about people of color being La Leche League leaders. Someone else is commenting that yes, the IBLC journey has definitely been an experience. I'm still working towards certification. Someone's commenting professionalizing and certifying breastfeeding support advocates needs to be reviewed and reconsidered. Someone else is questioning whether or not they should become an IBCLC.
Yeah. Listen, we're not here to deter anyone. Yeah, but no, from reaching their goals. I'll say that much. I mean, it certainly is a way to feed your family. It certainly is
yes,
a worthy career to embark upon, and folks are doing phenomenal work. I think it's noble work that we do. We're talking about just the structures that make it what it is, and create barriers to lots of folks trying to reach this credential. Kimberly.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I don't think it's an either or, that it's an and, right? Yes, we need more Black and brown IBCLCs, and we need everyone to respect the different levels of lactation support, because not everybody needs an IBCLC, right? And so how can we all create respect and, professional courtesy, et cetera, for those other layers of support, which are also equally important, particularly for those who may not be able to afford it or their insurance doesn't cover it, but there needs to be both, right? And both needs to be valued and respected, and not or. It's just this and nothing else, but also that we can honor the other certifications that that are there and are accessible as well. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I
Agreed.
want to speak to the question of, and I apologize, it is a real question. Your question is real and it's valid. Of, is La Leche League inclusive? It is, in my space. It is not. Okay, and it has not been historically that way, and that is some of the reason why, and some of my peers have created breastfeeding support groups for women or families of color. Okay, it is for these reasons that we've done that, because it wasn't a culturally inclusive space. Folks didn't feel, for income purposes, they didn't feel included. I've had several families, they're like, I'm not even there, and I have to work, and all these things. And I feel like there were barriers put in place. And if you didn't fit this model of who they were looking for, then you just wouldn't feel comfortable. And there was no effort to change that either. And mind you, now that could be changing, but for many of the clients that I have, I've heard the same complaint over and over. I went there because that's what I hear, right? You type in how to wean a baby, how to get a latch, La Leche League comes up, and you're like, oh, there's one in my space. Let me go to it. But it wasn't, they didn't feel like it was for them specifically, or some of the things that they stand for, actually. So.
And,
All right,
I
so
do think they are trying to improve. I will give them that. And,
Yeah.
we've had many conversations. It's not where it needs to be. I went to a La Leche League meeting when I was nursing with my son. And, this was before I was really into this work, but this was really what led me into this work. Was I went to a meeting in my neighborhood, kind of desperate for some support. I did have to go back to work, but I had a 12-month unpaid leave. And I just was like, there is nobody here who looks like me. There is nobody here who's in my same circumstances around going back to work very soon, and just all sorts of things. But it was really an experience where I felt unwanted, and I never went back. And I don't remember how I figured out how I needed to get through that breastfeeding hurdle, because I had very few resources as it is, as a Black woman, first breastfeeder in my family, and for me to kind of go there excitedly, hoping to be helped, and to leave so disappointed, that part I will never forget. And so, they definitely, were hopeful that as they have more La Leche League leaders of color, I think that number is improving, that can help, but it's certainly not where it needs to be in terms of being representative of the populations and the demographics of this country.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So full disclosure here. That was my response, was, dismissive, but it was also tongue in cheek. I am a current active La Leche League leader. I am. It was my foray into breastfeeding support. I don't begrudge La Leche League at all, for my own personal journey, if you will. They motivated me, if you will, to get to where I am now. But the organization is rife with challenges regarding diversity and equity. As Nikki, but as both of you have shared, your experiences are not unique among people of color seeking help within the organization, and it has so much to do with how they were built. We talked about, where the roots were, and that model still exists today. It's the very same model. So someone becomes a leader, they plant roots in their little suburb, and folks come to meet them where they are, and generally they look like they look, right? However, there has been great strides forward. I'm really proud of the work that La Leche League USA has done, separate from La Leche League International. Leche League USA is doing great work to continue to grow in this area, and they have more Black leaders than ever before, more leaders that are non-binary, more leaders that are just people of color in general, and different lived experiences, different abilities. So I'm really, really excited about what's happening there, and that is why I'm still there. That is why I still do the work that I do, and represent them in a couple of different spaces. But it is what it is, right? The history is what it is. The experiences that folks share that they've had with the Leche League are real, and they're valid, and they point to systemic issues in the organization that are still yet being worked out. So there's a real answer as opposed to my first response. I've got a list of questions here from Angela still, though. Someone says frequently people who work exclusively as IBCLCs need another credential or license. I just was having a discussion today with someone who is like Nikki, a nurse practitioner. They can do far more than I can do as an IBCLC alone, non-RN. You know, I can't even bill certain insurance companies. They won't even talk to me without an RN. And that's a shame when it takes so much work to get to the credential to still not be valued enough in doing your work alone, right? We still just assess. We can't diagnose. There's so many limits on the work that we do, even after working so hard to get to the credential. I'll stop there and see if either of you have feedback on that before I move to the next question.
I think we hear that a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Kimberly.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add to that. I think much of this is centered around where you can work, right? And because our system has centered hospitals so much, right? Everything is relative to what you can do there, and that becomes the centerpiece of everything. And so because a nurse practitioner can practice within a hospital, that it has already validated that person to now do these other things versus you not doing that, you need that additional validation because the hospital is at the epicenter of everything. And, you know, this is another model that needs to be deconstructed. We've seen clearly, and I've been talking about in COVID, the ways that the hospital needs to be decentered in birth and breastfeeding, and the price we're paying for having a, you know, a system that is wholly dependent on that model right now, you know, besides for a few bright spots of birthing centers here and there. And so, you know, that trickles into many other areas that are supporting birth and breastfeeding as well. And so, you know, we talk about decolonization, but decentering hospitals is a big part of that because of the power they have as a medical institution. And we know that that medical institution itself is rooted in racism. So, you know, it continues.
I love that language of decentering hospitals. If anyone here has done the research on granny midwives and the work that they did in this country, you know, well before the, you know, kind of creation of this modern hospital construct, but granny midwives birthed, you know, worked in helping, you know, birthing people bring their babies into the world for years and years and years, and then were effectively, intentionally, you know, driven out of their work by, as you said, just like the pediatricians, the white male pediatricians came along, the white male OBs came along, and that credential, in fact, really decimated the work of granny midwives, right? Got rid of them completely, made them illegitimate, if you will. You know what I mean? And so that's been intentional work that's happened over many, many years that would be really, really difficult to deconstruct, but we can do that one family at a time, right? Making these choices to decenter the hospital and make birth not a thing that needs to be fixed, not an ailment, not a broken thing. You know, we go into the hospital to have babies as if we've broken a leg. We need to be fixed. When that's not at all how we should be looking at it. So perfect language. I love that. Somebody wants to know about our opinion on the baby cafe model and that type of support setting.
We have several baby cafes here in New Orleans, and it's my impression that the baby cafe model is, again, there are tons and tons of like, you need this, you need this, you need this, you need this. It's just like a checklist. It's like 20 things that need to be in place in order for you to have a space where mamas and parents can come to get breastfeeding help for free. and that just seems like there's just so much. But again, these are all models of systems and organizations and stuff that created their own thing. Keep in mind that all of these things were created. That doesn't, and people buy into it, and it continues to build and build and grow. But it was just created, it came from a small idea, and you can have that idea too. Like you can have your own breastfeeding support group. A lot of the breastfeeding support groups that we see in our spaces and and our colleagues and friends and stuff have, that was an idea. That was something they're like, look, I got 2 girls, we getting together, we breastfed, y'all want to have a group? Let's find a spot, a library or the park or something. That's where this came from. And then it built and built, and like, let's put some bylaws with it. Let's put some, checklists with it. Let's, all these things. Baby Cafe, I'm sure, was an idea at some point at a little hospital. And so you don't always have to feed into those big models and pay all this money. You could come up with your own jam, and it totally worked for you and your space. Because remember, a lot of times with those models, there are so many constraints that it's hard to fit your community values and your community charm and everything into it. It's hard to maneuver within those spaces when you just really need to personalize one for your space.
Yeah, so there's whew, there are many consequences, to the way that our family systems were disrupted. If you were part of the diaspora, if you're part, if you have are descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, there are many consequences to family structures being, broken down and families ripped apart and such, and so that we are not unique in this particular aspect in terms of African Americans, that we lost along the way a lot of that experiences of seeing one another nurse our babies at the breast in a village or community type of experience. And so that it's not new to me because, my sister did it, my mom did it, my cousins do it, they're wet nursing, across, it's something I see all the time. And so when I run into a problem, any number of people around me can tell me how to fix it, right? So we've lost a bit of that over over time, and just the way that we live, really independently and separately, and not in a village anymore, not a community as much anymore. We don't have the support that once was there, and so where I'm going is in creating these formalized support groups and settings, there is a need, I think, to bring in some solid information. Okay, so no, Gatorade is not a thing that makes your milk supply come up. We need, there's a need for a person to say that, right, in that space. So there's a little bit of caution to leaving nursing parents to their own devices, right? Because we see some of the bad information that gets circulated among them based solely in the fact that they just haven't had a lot of time to see this thing work amongst their community and see it work amongst everybody around them doing this thing. And so with that being missed in there, that's, I think, part of why these formal setting up of support groups tend to kind of go awry, because you got a person whose sole job there is to just make sure evidence-based good information is being shared in the group, in the space, and nobody's leading anybody astray and hurting another person's supply. But it becomes now this really structured, formal thing where you got to meet this, you said, all this criteria to run the group, and it loses the beauty of that community that they were going for in the first place. Here we go again in these structures that weren't really meant to fit this work that we're doing. There's a quote here Angela shared. Someone said the model for lactation support is based on an allopathic medical and academic framework. It ignores those who do not have evidence that those authorities recognize. That's just what we talked about, right? And so you don't have that particular degree, you don't have all these courses, you don't check all these boxes, you're no longer worthy to do this work. And that's not how it should be. It's not how it was many years ago. And so we're talking about kind of hearkening back to what we knew was ancestral knowledge, we knew was community knowledge, we knew, was passed along through family members and community members to support one another effectively. How can we get back to that, right? Without all these barriers to actually being able to support folks formally. Get there. Yeah.
All right, Angela.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Kimberly. Go ahead.
I was just going to touch on, just everything that you both said, but also just around like this theme around gatekeeping, right? Like always creating some sort of requirement for somebody. It's like, stop. I just can't. The other thing that I also need to say is that, I think that in our breastfeeding work that we often have an idea around there's one thing. No, there are many things There are many, there need to be many things, right? And I often talk about this, about how, we need the Weight Watchers approach, right? Because Weight Watchers, they got an app, they got a group for you to go to, they have a phone line for you. If I reach for a brownie, someone's going to jump up out of nowhere and be like, don't do it. It's like they figured out that for
I
you
need
to
that.
for you to stay the course, you need support all types of ways, whether it's an expert, a friend, a kid, like they've got it. And we really need to think about that, not just in this model, that model, but how many more things can we create, right? We need more. And so that we can be, have that peer-to-peer, have someone who's able to kind of, kind of go through what is actually factual and what is not, but I just want us to always, kind of lean into creativity, and that it's not one thing ever in anything, and that we need more things that can support different types of folks in our breastfeeding work. And I think we often get caught up on, like, this is it. And it's like, no, it's never going to be one thing. That's just not the way it works for transformation. So, and, just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. You mentioned something on one of your lives recently, Kimberly, about sleep customs, and I think that's really very similar along those same lines. Folks are sleeping with or without their babies in a million different ways, and there's no one way to support them in doing that, right? We have to respect where we are, where we live, what works for our lives, and what our truth is. So I appreciate that. Can we talk through some resources? I know we've got a very important one on the call here today that we want to hear about, that can help us dismantle some of these systems and decolonize this work. That's you.
That's you, Kimberly.
Well, I like to talk about one system, one tool of the many things that are out there. And I always say Earth is, a thing, not the thing, because we know that, we really need to have more community-centered models. I think this is what we all recognize. And I'm so proud about Earth because it is a digital platform that really lifts up the lived experience, right? It's not a way to measure how many C-sections or infections. No, we want to know, how did you feel? Did you feel disrespected? Did someone give you eye contact? Like, how did you feel about that experience? Because we know that so many times you can accept many things, but it's not what happens, it's how it happens that can often make the difference between acceptance and trauma, right? And I'm living through that again right now. So, how things happen can really make a difference in terms of how that experience leaves you. And so really we center that. And so Earth is a platform for Black and Brown birthing people and other marginalized groups to leave and find a review of a doctor or physician in maternity and infant care, and then use that tool as a way to, on the front end, to inform their own decision making about providers. We need to know where we are receiving good care and where we are not. At Earth, we say we are a sister's keeper, right? And so we let our community know where we are thinking that we have good care and where we don't. And on the back end, I'm real excited about being able to have these qualitative experiences that we turn into quantitative data, so that now we've put all of our experiences in one place. We can use that to go to hospitals and say, hey, listen, we have 1,000 women from your hospital who are saying 80% of the Black women are saying this, 70% are saying they had their pain levels dismissed. So we can really get to the details. The things that I'm real excited about, because so many times right now we see hospitals just doing anti-bias trainings. We know they are centered. They come after Earth in many ways, but that's fine. But we really want to show that we want to center the lived experience of care, and that we need to better understand what bias is, right? Because we're talking about something in an abstract intellectual way. We're taking a standardized implicit bias test, or talking about our childhood, looking at some pictures, but what does it mean to that particular patient, right? And the more that we can elucidate and learn about those types of behaviors that are perceived experiences of bias and racism and perceived experience of disrespect, then we can improve on our care for all, which includes breastfeeding. So when you go through the Earth app to leave a review, if you are leaving a review for a birthing experience, you will be asked about the physicians and the nurses and the lactation consultants. And so I'm excited that we're learning about that. During Black Breastfeeding Week, we shared some preliminary findings from what we're learning about people's experiences of bias in breastfeeding. And I really hope that Earth can be a tool to lend more light to what we're doing in this work, but also in the broader birth movement, so that we can, really start to address this issue in a new way.
Where can folks find out more about Earth?
So people can find out about Earth at birthwithoutbias.com. We are right now capturing reviews from specifically funded reviews for 5 cities: New York, DC, New Orleans, Sacramento, and Detroit. Did I say that right? Okay. So those are our 5 focus cities. When folks complete a review in those cities, they can receive $25 gift cards, Earth t-shirts and merchandise. We have lots of brands that have come in for larger prizes that you can enter. Strollers and car seats were given away. So I'm excited about this opportunity. And I'm sharing here first that we are launching nationwide in mid-November. So I am in the thick of birth and Earth. This is last trimester, folks. Last trimester.
That's it. Listen, I
I'm all
can't wait for
fuck
you
things.
to take my experience from Los Angeles. Let me know when Los Angeles is in the mix. I can't wait to.
Okay. I will let you know. And please, just, we take all experiences. Leave it now, so when we launch, it'll be there. And our goal is
Fantastic.
the app with these experiences. We're already beginning to see trends of how people are perceiving experiences of bias, so we can address that. And then ultimately, we want to help provide the solutions to address the problems. And so my goal, my vision for Earth is that it becomes this brand for bias-free care, and that, first of all women birth with Earth. You go to it first to see how your provider or hospital has been reviewed by your true peers, and that on the back end, and then in some one day soon, we will all walk into hospitals and physicians and know that they are Earth approved, which means that your community of people like you have approved this, not some agency that doesn't know anything about you. So that is really my vision for Earth. I also talk about Earth as a tool for allyship. We do invite white women at this point to leave a review. It helps us to see distinctions, but also that white women will use it as a tool in their own decision making, and that ultimately they too will use their consumer power. So all women can use our consumer power in service of those who are being disproportionately harmed by this system, right? And so that really would be a beautiful moment for all of us to come together in service of Black and brown birthing folks. So I'm excited about that too.
I love it. I love it. You heard it here first, people. You heard it here first. Hot off the press, exclusive news. Birthwithoutbias.com.
Birthwithoutbias.com. Birthwithoutbias.com.
And that's one, like she said, that's not the answer. That's one answer. And there'll be a million answers to this problem that we presented today. But that is one that's so fascinating and has the potential to do such good, such good. So we're excited to have it shared here with us today. Nikki, did you have anything you want to say to the people?
I just wanted to again thank you so much for coming in and sharing your truths and your research, because you've been doing this for a minute, and you've been pioneering breastfeeding work and looking at all of this data for a minute, and we really appreciate. And I hope people have been telling you how much we appreciate you writing articles and speaking the truth to the world in such a voluminous way. So we thank you so much, Kimberly.
Absolutely.
And I'm always in awe of the folks who are on the ground. I'm grateful to be able to amplify the work that people are doing, and for us to be one of the tools to to bring more attention and mainstream attention to this issue. So I'm just always grateful to be of service and always here to help.
Yes. We've got a few questions here. Some questions have been related to scope or international reach. I would offer that the issues we've raised today are not unique to the United States. There has been colonization the world over. And so no matter where you go, there are some indigenous practices around birthing and breastfeeding and supporting one another through birthhood that we can harken back to it, and that we can make sure that we reinforce as ways that work in our communities, and do not negate them, and do not overshadow them with this formalized, structured approach that we've been given. It's centering hospitals, centering medicalization and professionalization of this work would be my thought there. Someone's brought up birthing maternity clinics, I think was the term, maternity clinics, harkening back to those. Do you think that makes sense? That is probably a way that this could work in certain communities. Find out what works for the folks that you are serving and do them the honor of exploring that, right? And figuring out how you can make their birthing and breastfeeding experiences make sense, and really speak to their needs. That's what this conversation's been about today, and it won't end here. It will keep going. Nikki and I think want to share that we have a resource as well that we think will be beneficial. We have started a directory of Black lactation supporters. Please, please, please take a look at that. If you're looking for someone who is in your area who's doing this work, who you can even come alongside as an ally, that is a great place to start. Find someone who's doing the work, who knows the community and knows their needs, and come alongside and see how you can help to amplify or to support in the work that they're doing. We will drop the link. I'll text that to you, Angela, to put in the chat.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we'll put that in the chat. And then I've had for a very long time a running directory of breastfeeding support groups specifically for folks of color as well. And that we've, I think, touched every state. There's about 100 different groups listed on there. And please add yourself if you've got a group that you want to add to the directory, but also feel free to reference in terms of groups in your community that are doing the work already in a way that makes sense to the folks that they are serving. Whew, that was a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Let's see
all our resources.
I appreciate you really stressing that, like this idea that it needs to be locally adapted. It needs to be rooted in the community, not coming in from the outside. And that is just so important. It seems to be the hardest thing for some people. And we really have to talk about, we can't talk about decolonization without talking about power. And so how do we address power dynamics within the work, and how do we dismantle some of those systems of power and ideas about holding power within the work? I am often troubled when I travel to see, you know, the turf wars and the this was me, and trust me, people have called the foundation on me for doing work in a particular state. I was just like, wait, what? As if I'm, you know, and I was working in places where I never saw any of these people. So, you know, and invitations are always open to join. And so this idea of who owns breastfeeding, whether that's a local conversation or a regional conversation or a national conversation, is also part of how we decolonize, because the people own breastfeeding, right? The people who we seek to serve ultimately own breastfeeding. And, you know, for us to eliminate disparities, it needs to be Black and brown folks who we center and listen to in this process of trying to undo what the years of systemic racism has done disproportionately to Black babies and Black mothers. So I hope that we can think about that as well, not just our processes, but the ways that power really shows up in our work, and that we could be active in ceding power, making space, and then examining our own, the work that you individually may need to do around your own power and privilege. So that's all part of how we decolonize, because all of that is a product of, you know, white supremacy. So if we don't get to that, then we're not really going to get to the root of it.
Yes, yes. Woo! That was a mouthful. That's it, though. That really is it. Thank you for that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your talents. Thank you for sharing Earth with us today. Really appreciate you. The audience is saying, I got chills. This has been amazing. Thank you. Thank you. And so, as we say, we will continue the conversation. There's more work to be done, but we're so happy that you're here doing it with us and that you're learning with us on this journey. Nikki, can we tell them about our next webinar?
Our next webinar is October the 21st, and we will be talking about inclusivity with breastfeeding, chest feeding. And we'll have a special guest on that day is Savannah Shane, and she is a CLC up in Oakland, and she will come and talk to us about using words matter and using the correct language in speaking and advising and consulting with our clients. So we're really excited about that, because I think some people, they're like, I don't want to make a mistake and I don't want to say the wrong thing. Well, here, we're going to go over this. And so to make you feel better in the words that you're choosing to use in your practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then you heard it here first. We're going to be here the day after the election.
Yes.
The morning after the election, Nikki and I will be here holding space for all of
Mm-hmm.
you, and talking through what a new administration may mean to our work in the next 4 years. We'll be here.
Yep. All right, y'all. Thank y'all
That's all
so
we
much
got
for
today.
joining us. We
Thank you
appreciate
very much.
everyone coming.
We appreciate
Thank you
you.
very
We'll see you next
much.
time. Stay
Thank
safe and
you.
sanitized.
Stay safe and sanitized.